is knowledge that should be known, and there is knowledge that should be buried, and there is knowledge that should be kept safe. The legend of the Cailleach and her hammer is not one that is widely known, and for good reason. After all, she doesn't want to be bothered. Most folk in Scotland have never even heard of her, but that wasn't always the case. Once, every little girl and boy knew about the story of the Cailleach and her magic hammer. Once, every child was told the tale of how she brought winter to the land every year, sitting on her throne at the top of Ben Nevis, surveying her kingdom, yielding her power only when White Angus came to send her away to the forests in the spring. Yes, once everyone knew the tale of the Cailleach. But a tale was all it was. A good one, it was agreed, but just something to pass the time as the wind howled round the fire on winter's nights. Just a story. Or was it? In one little glen, in one little village, in one little house, in one little family, there was one little girl who wasn't so sure. Her name was Maeve. Her hair was the colour of burnt straw, her eyes were the colour of burnt chestnuts, and her feet were the colour of burnt peat, as she'd just finished tending to the fire that kept both the animals and the humans warm-ish here in their dark, smoky black house. Maeve was 10 years old. She was wide awake when the rest of the village, even the pigs, were fast asleep. Maeve whispered into the darkness, "I believe in you, Bheur." Suddenly, there was a terrible rumbling sound. It seemed to come from the earth itself, an almighty crashing roar that startled the rest of the household awake. "What's happening?" she shouted to her father, and she and the rest of the family scrambled upright and looked around for the cause of the noise. "We're being attacked!" yelled her older brother, who was always desperate to fight something. "Get out of the house," called her father, already out the door. They dashed outside into the freezing cold night air. It was like the earth itself was quaking, and Maeve kept stumbling as the crashing continued, one roar after another. Morag, the unofficial elder of the village, was running towards them as fast as her elderly legs could carry her, pointing up at the hills that surrounded their small scattering of buildings. "Look, the rocks!" Sure enough, an avalanche of stone was crashing and sliding down the side of the hills, barely visible by moonlight. "Get back inside," Morag yelled, already making her way back to her own cottage. Maeve, her brother, and her father hastily rushed back into their black house, the sounds of the frightened animals adding to the din. Maeve tried to calm down the hens, a pointless task, as her brother hushed the cow, trying to stop it from thrashing around and kicking out the fire. Gradually, the sounds of rockfall slowed, became a trickle, and then, slowly, stopped. By the time that Maeve and her family felt brave enough to leave their house and go and see how bad the damage was, weak sunlight was beginning to appear over the top of the hills, the warm glow of the dawning day illuminating just how bad the situation was. The path out of the village was completely blocked, the rockfall trapping Maeve's family, Morag, and all the other residents of their little gathering of houses so that they couldn't get out of the glen. "What'll we do?" cried the villagers to one another, everyone talking at once. Maeve rather irritably thought that there was no point continuing with all the questions since no one had any answers, but that didn't seem to be stopping anyone. Grown-ups. All they did was talk, talk, talk. She went forward to have a closer look at the wall of stone now blocking them in. It stretched up and up and up, and she had to crane her neck to see the top of it. "I could climb it," she heard her brother volunteer proudly. "I could go and get help." "What help? It's too large," said one of the women. "We need 100 men to help move all that, and by that point we'll have frozen to death, the lack of peat for the fire, and the lack of food, and the lack of..." "It's just an idea," Maeve's brother muttered solemnly. Maeve had a thought. She knew it wasn't going to be a very popular thought, but it was worth a try. "We could try and find the Cailleach Bheur." There was a silence, broken only by a few sniggers. "Don't embarrass me, girl," her father growled. "That's only a stupid story." "Says who, Rory?" It was Morag, hobbling awkwardly towards them. "Megan's right. We'll be dead by the time that enough men to shift all this rubble are found. You may not believe in the Cailleach Bheur, but I do, and I also believe that she might be our only chance at getting out of this glen alive. Maeve must go and find her, persuade her to help us." There were mutterings amongst the others that old Morag had finally lost the plot, but Maeve grinned. "I knew I wasn't the only one who believed in her. Father, let me go and search for her. I can save the village. I know I can." "How?" her father demanded. "Moanna, you're just a child. She's the only one out of all of you who truly believes," Morag countered. "How is someone who doesn't believe in something ever going to find it? Besides," she added after a slight pause, "I think she's the only one small enough, apart from the tiny bairns over in Sinead's house, to be able to squeeze through that gap in the rocks, and I think she'll be better at finding help than a 4-year-old. Don't you?" "Are you prepared to do this, Maeve?" Morag asked solemnly, turning to Maeve, who'd been listening to all of this with a mix of disbelief, excitement, and nerves. It was quite one thing to hope for a grand adventure, quite another to discover that you were going to be given one without too much say in the matter. "Will you go and find the Cailleach Bheur? For the sake of your family, your village?" "I will," promised Maeve, ignoring the sighs of the disbelieving other villagers. "Ugh, a child going in search of a mythical hero," Sinead muttered. "I'll start planning my death rites now." "Go, Maeve, northwards go. You alone can save us from the ice and snow. Go on, Maeve, and think of us below. You alone can save us from the ice and cold." daughter, her father sighed. Why did it have to be my daughter? Why not? Maeve replied. After all, I was looking for an adventure. I think you'll find a little bit more going on an adventure on this journey, her father muttered. But he found her some oatmeal, a flask full of water, a blanket that smelled of smoke and chicken droppings, a knife and a shawl, and they stopped for a short talk with Morag on the way out of the village. The Cailleach Bheur lives at the very top of Ben Nevis, Morag said, showing Maeve the way with a drawn-out map in the dirt. There will be many challenges on the way. Steep hills, snow, strangers. Be polite, but firm. Be brave, but not foolhardy, and watch out for dragons. Dragons? Said Maeve, hardly believing she'd heard Morag correctly. Morag winked. Now, off with you. Good luck, Maeve. You'll need it. Maeve waved goodbye to her father, who seemed to suddenly have something dusty in both his eyes, to her brother, who scowled at her good fortune at getting the adventure, at the rest of the village, who were fairly sure that this was the last time they would ever see her alive, but waved with weak cheer in return. Maeve climbed up the avalanche until she found the chink that Morag had spotted. She wiggled through, she dropped down the other side, and then slowly, with trepidation, Maeve began to walk. She left the village that she'd known since birth. She left the glen that she'd known since birth. Until gradually, bit by bit, she left everything she'd known in her short life so far. Until eventually, she looked round and realised there was nothing that she knew in the landscape in which she walked. Nothing at all. Maeve walked on and on and on. The winter skies had cleared to make way for a brilliant, chilly sunshine. The morning passed, then the afternoon. Maeve began to feel tired and more than a little bored. Perhaps adventuring wasn't quite as exciting as she'd first thought, particularly when the only company walking this way alongside her was the occasional sheep. At least, Maeve thought that was the only company. Now that she looked closer, she suddenly spotted an old woman sitting next to the path up ahead, her back leaning against a rock. "Fesker ma," Maeve called. "Do you know how to find the Cailleach Bheur?" The old woman frowned. "Find her? Ha! You do not want to find the Cailleach Bheur." "Oh, but I do," said Maeve urgently. "It's very important." "She created Loch Law from the water in just one well," warned the old woman. "She'll turn you into a puddle, mark my words." Maeve gulped, but she stayed resolute. "Nevertheless, I have to find her. Do you know the way?" The old woman frowned, then sighed. Go up that mountain path there, and keep going through the snow till you come out the other side above the crowds. But don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't, thank you," Maeve assured her, then struck out in the direction that the woman had gestured, her warning still ringing ominously in her ears. Maeve walked up and up and up. The greens and browns of moss, heather and peat slowly turned darker and firmer underfoot as the frost began to creep into the ground underneath her. Maeve realised that her breath was beginning to mist in front of her. It wouldn't be long before she reached the snowy side of the mountain. As the air itself turned painful in her lungs, her hands and face numb with cold, Maeve stubbornly plodded on as around her, snow began to fall. snow was falling with a silent ferociousness that was more frightening than a howl. Maeve could only see white. White behind, white in front, white all around. This was bad. Very bad. She needed to find shelter. If she was lost, better to wait out the snow somewhere where she wouldn't freeze to death. As if on cue, something dark and wide loomed dimly in the distance. It was a cave of some sort, and as Maeve drew closer, she let out a sigh of relief. The dark mass of the cave drew closer and closer, and then finally, she was standing in the mouth of it. The sound of falling snow was muffled inside the entrance, and as she stood there shivering, she gave thanks to anyone who was listening for such good fortune. Slowly, cautiously, Maeve made her way further inside the cave. Squinting in the blackness, she picked up some branches, smooth to the touch, and some grass. She piled them up, then got down to the business of trying to make a spark out of a flint, breath misting in the freezing cold air. A long-awaited spark illuminated the cave, and Maeve suddenly realised that she hadn't made a pile of branches. She'd made a pile of human bones. She screamed, dropping the flint in fright, then clapped a hand to her mouth in fear that whoever had made these beings into bones might still be lurking in the darkness, but it was too late. Who dares enter my cave? snow and ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Glancing back, she saw the dim outline of something scaly and fanged and with giant flapping wings roar at her from the entrance of the cave. She'd just escaped being eaten by a dragon. No more caves from now on, she promised herself, trudging onwards. Would she ever manage to find somewhere to rest? Finally, Maeve could see green grass ahead of her. She'd made it out of the snow. Maeve looked back at the icy wastelands and forwards towards the strangely calm landscape in front of her. The snow was gone. Only bare rock and moss remained. She must nearly be at the top now, surely. The terrain was steep enough. There were no sheep up here, let alone other people. She suddenly felt very lonely and unsure. The light was nearly out of the skies. It was time to rest for the day. Maeve made a fire. A small, sad-looking fire, but a fire nevertheless, and huddled next to it as she cooked her oatmeal and drank some water from her flask. It had been a long, hard day, and before she knew it, she had fallen fast asleep. Suddenly, she woke up, the pink hues of sunrise illuminating the landscape around her. She had the inexplicable feeling that someone was watching her. Expecting a sheep, she turned round and instead, much to her surprise, saw a woman, brown-haired and dressed plainly, sitting on a rock nearby. "Matin va!" she called, waving frantically. "Do you know how to find the Cailleach Bheur?" "Find her?" said the woman with a frown. "You do not want to find the Cailleach Bheur." "Oh, but I do," said Maeve with a sigh. "It's very important." "She made her own sons prisoners in the tall mountains over there," warned the woman. "She'll lock you up too, mark my words." Maeve turned pale, but she stayed resolute. "Nevertheless, I have to find her. Do you know the way?" The middle-aged woman frowned, then sighed. "Turn right and walk through that forest of trees till you come out next to a path up to the mountain top. But don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't, thank you," Maeve assured her, then packed up her things and turned to set off in the direction in which the woman had pointed. When she turned round to bid her farewell, the woman had vanished. Odd, thought Maeve, but maybe the folk up here had different ideas of polite behaviour. She started off, the woman's warning still ringing ominously in her ears. Maeve scrambled and fell over tree roots and puddles and low-hanging branches and thick-growing ivy. And then, just when she thought she could go no further, she spotted daylight through the thick trees. She had made it out of the forest. She was nearly at the end of her journey, and yes, there was the path, as the woman had described it. A well-made path, made of stone slabs that glittered in the light, a path that seemed to stretch up into the sky. And there, sitting at the bottom of the staircase, was a little girl, younger than Maeve, with hair the colour of sunlight and skin the colour of milk. "First, Grandma," Maeve said wearily, "do you know how to find the Cailleach Bheur?" "Find her?" said the little girl with a frown. "Pah! You do not want to find the Cailleach Bheur." "Oh, but I do," said Maeve, feeling like she might cry. "It's very important. She's so big, she washes her clothes in whirlpools and throws hailstones from her fists. She'd crush you in an instant." Maeve wanted to give up, but she was so close. She gathered her courage. "Nevertheless, I have to find her. Do you know the way?" The little girl frowned, then sighed. Keep climbing up these steps, and at the top you will find her throne. But you'll have to be quick. Spring is coming, and the Cailleach Bheur won't be staying around here for much longer. Don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't, thank you," Maeve assured her, and started to climb up the steps to the throne of the Cailleach Bheur. the air was so thin it was hard to breathe, when she was so high up that she daren't look down, she reached the end of the steps and walked into the palace of the Bheur. The walls, the floor, the towering ceilings were all sparkling white and made out of sheer ice. Beautiful stalagmites and stalactites hung everywhere, and the windows were carved with breathtaking frost patterns. And there, in the middle of the icy splendour, was the little girl, sitting on a large white throne that gleamed in the light. Maeve had a moment of confusion before the girl stood up and smiled at her. "Do you not recognise me, Maeve? I've been travelling alongside you since your journey began, after all." Before Maeve's eyes, the little girl changed into the plainly dressed middle-aged woman, and then the elderly lady, and then, finally, with an almighty bolt of thunder, grew in size until she towered above Maeve, who had fallen to her knees in shock. Blue skin, billowing robes, sharp teeth, a crown of ice, hair whipping in the wind she herself had created. This was the Bheur. "What are you going to do to me?" squeaked Maeve, all courage gone. The Bheur smiled. "I just thought I might share some of the tales humans like to tell about me to see how serious you were about your journey. But you have shown strength and determination. I like humans who are strong and determined, even those who are rather short. But you're too late, Maeve. Winter is nearly over. It's time for White Angus to take this crown and for me to go back to the forests for the summer. Come back with the frosts next year and try again." "Wait!" Maeve shouted, running forwards, boldness found once more. "Please, you don't understand. We need your help because no one else can save us." The Cailleach paused, her hands on her crown. "Go on," she said. "There was an avalanche," said Maeve, words tumbling out in her eagerness to explain. "There's too many rocks to clear, not even if we found 100 men, and we need out to cut the peat, to grow food, to survive the last of the winter and into the next year. Please, you're our only chance." The Cailleach looked thoughtful. "Well, I suppose it might not matter too much if the handover was a little late. Just this once," she said slowly. "But we must go quickly, before we upset the natural order of things." Maeve cautiously reached out and grasped the little finger of the Cailleach's outstretched hand with both of hers. "Where are we going?" She smiled. "You're home, of course. Close your hands and hold on tight." Maeve squeezed her eyes shut as the Cailleach picked up her hammer, threw it above her head and whipped it round in one massive circle, then slammed it back down to earth with the power of 1,000 horses. Maeve, thankful that her eyes were shut, felt like she'd been catapulted into space itself, wind whistling past her, face numb with the slap of brutal cold. Was she being dragged forwards, or backwards, or up, or down? She couldn't tell, but she certainly wasn't going to open her eyes to have a look. Half exhilarated, half terrified, she clung to the Cailleach as they hurtled towards her village. "We're here. You can look now," the Cailleach said, not unkindly, and Maeve cautiously cracked open one eye. The two of them were standing in front of the wall of fallen rocks, and in front of her were the houses of her beloved home. "You did it!" Maeve gasped, hugging the kayak floor before realising that probably wasn't the done thing, and quickly dropping her arms again. She didn't seem to mind, even though Maeve's brother, walking back to the house with a water bucket, had realised that a giant blue woman had suddenly appeared with his sister and began to scream. The villagers began to appear, going ashen-faced and wide-eyed when they saw the sight in front of them. Sinead looks like she was about to faint. Maeve waved cheerfully as Morag hobbled up as fast as she could. "I did it, Morag! Look!" I can see that, lass, I can see," Morag murmured, staring in amazement at the towering figure before her. "Maeve!" It was her father, who had come out to see what the commotion was and was now staring in alarm at his only daughter standing next to a god that could smite her at a second. "It's all right, father," Maeve called back. "She's here to help." And sure enough, the kayak raised her gigantic hammer, spun it in a circle around her head, and then pointed it at the rocks that had trapped the village. They began to tremble, then shake, then crack, then disintegrate, and then, as the villagers watched on incredulously, the hammer reduced them to a small pile of dust. "That should do the trick," said the Cailleach with a wink at Maeve. "Now I really do need to go." "You have to," said Maeve plaintively. "I've only just found you." The Cailleach smiled at her. "I do have to go, I'm afraid, but I'm never too far away." She looked up at the villager, still staring, then back at Maeve. "I'll leave you with a song with which to remember me. And you do know the journey now, after all. Perhaps I'll see you back at Ben Nevis sometime, Maeve the human." Now is the time of my ending. The wheel of the year spins away from the dark. I will think on you when we are apart. But now is the time of my ending. Now is the time for the newness of spring, and all of the things that those lighter months bring. When I depart, the warmth can begin. So now is the time for the new and the spring. Now's the time of my ending. The wheel of the year spins away from the dark. I will think on you when we are apart. But now's the time of my ending. Is my time for rest and for sleep, so please do not weep. I tell you that the years keep turning, I'm never far gone, and before long I will be back again. The seasons will never end, my word on this you can depend. But for now, Now's the time of my ending. The wheel of the year spins
away from the dark. I will think on you when we are apart. But now's the time of my ending. Now's the time of my ending. The wheel of the year spins away from the dark. I will think on you when we are apart. But now's the time of my ending.
The Cailleach Bheur swung her hammer, brought it ferociously crashing down onto the ground, and flew off like a bolt of lightning. Maeve was extremely glad she'd kept her eyes closed on the way there as she saw her shoot off into the sky, the first dregs of the amber sunset showing in between the clouds. There was a shocked moment of silence, where the village stared at Maeve, and Maeve looked shyly back. Her own father broke the pause. "That's my girl!" Cheers erupted and everyone ran forward to give Maeve a 20-person strong hug. People talking over each other, the children jumping around, screaming with delight. "You did it, Maeve, you did it!" "I did do it," thought Maeve. "What do I do now?" Morag caught her eye and smiled, seeming to read her thoughts. "Well, you've proved yourself quite an adventurer." "Yeah," said Maeve, a little sad despite herself. "But now the adventure's over." "Ugh, there's always another adventure to be had," said Morag with a wink. "But for now, let's have a Cailleach. To celebrate your safe return, Rory can go get his fiddle." A Cailleach sounded pretty good. Maeve looked back into the darkening sky at where the Cailleach Bheur had disappeared into the distance and smiled to herself. "I knew you were real," she whispered.